What happens when the most talented player in the world becomes a tactical puzzle his team can't solve? In 2024, Jude Bellingham was untouchable. He was the beating heart of Real Madrid, the undisputed saviour of England, a generational talent operating at a frequency nobody had ever seen from a midfielder in modern football. And then, it stopped. His goal output collapsed. The headlines changed. And Thomas Tuchel made the unthinkable decision to drop Jude Bellingham from the England national team. Let that sink in for a second. The player who was being compared to Zinedine Zidane, the player who was carrying Real Madrid on his back like it was nothing, the player the entire nation of England had crowned as their next football king, dropped, set aside, overlooked. The football world erupted. Fans were furious. Pundits were baffled. Social media went into absolute meltdown. How could Tuchel do this? How could he drop Bellingham? But here's the question nobody was brave enough to ask at the time. What if Tuchel wasn't wrong? What if, beneath all the noise, beneath all the outrage, beneath all the mythology built around this young man, Thomas Tuchel saw something the rest of the world refused to see? This video is not a takedown of Jude Bellingham. Let me be absolutely clear about that from the very start. This is not one of those videos designed to drag a player through the mud for clicks. Bellingham is extraordinary. His talent is real. His ceiling is still arguably limitless. But this is something far more interesting. This is the story of what happens when a tactical system builds a myth around a player so powerful that even the player himself starts to believe it. This is the story of how one historic season created a version of Jude Bellingham that was never going to be sustainable. And this is the story of why Thomas Tuchel, in making the most unpopular decision of his England tenure, may have actually done Bellingham the biggest favor of his career. We are going deep today. We are going tactical. We are going historical. We are going to challenge everything you think you know about Jude Bellingham, about Thomas Tuchel, and about what it actually means to be England's most important player. If you are new to this channel, welcome to Cyberboot. Hit that subscribe button right now because this is exactly the kind of content we make here. Deep, tactical, fearless. And if you're already part of the Cyberboot family, you already know we don't do surface level here. Before we talk about the fall, before we talk about Tuchel, before we talk about tactics and statistics, we need to go back to the beginning. Because to truly understand what happened to Jude Bellingham, you need to understand just how extraordinary the rise was. And I don't use the word extraordinary lightly. When Real Madrid paid Borussia Dortmund an initial fee of $103 million for a 20-year-old Jude Bellingham, the football world paused. That is not a small number. That is not a gamble you take on a hunch. Real Madrid had decided that this young man from Stourbridge was worth more than almost any player in football history at that age. Now, there are two ways to respond to that kind of transfer. Either you arrive and spend a year finding your feet, adjusting, learning the weight of the shirt, or you arrive and immediately justify every single penny. Bellingham chose the second option, and not just by a little. He became the first Real Madrid player since Cristiano Ronaldo to score in his first 4 competitive appearances, netting 5 times in that opening spell alone. Think about what that means. The list of players who have worn that white shirt is incomprehensible. Legends, icons, champions. And this 20-year-old kid walked in and matched the opening impact of arguably the greatest player of all time. But the goals weren't just goals. That's what made this different. These weren't tap-ins. These weren't penalty box finishes from a striker on the doorstep. These were moments, the kind that make you stop whatever you're doing and stare at your screen with your mouth open. A 94th minute winner in the Champions League, making him the youngest Englishman to score a 90th minute winner in European competition. And then, a 92nd minute winner in his very first El Clasico, after equalizing with a 30-yard strike. I want you to pause right there for a moment. His first El Clasico, not his 5th, not after years of settling in, his first against Barcelona, in the most watched club fixture on the planet. He equalized with a strike from 30 yards, and then won it in the 92nd minute. You cannot write this. You literally cannot write this, because if you put this in a screenplay, producers would tell you it's too unrealistic. By the end of that 2023-24 season, the numbers were historic. 19 La Liga goals, 23 across all competitions, the Copa Trophy, the Golden Boy Award, La Liga Player of the Season. His underlying metrics, 0.74 goals per 90 minutes, 0.74 expected goals per 90 minutes, were the numbers of an elite world-class center forward. Well, not a midfielder, a center forward. He was 20 years old. So when we talk about the mythology of Jude Bellingham, this is where it was forged. This one season, this golden, almost supernatural season, permanently etching the image of Bellingham as a number 9 into the collective consciousness of football fans everywhere. Not Bellingham the midfielder, not Bellingham the box-to-box engine, Bellingham the striker, Bellingham the savior, Bellingham the unstoppable. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Here is where the tactical truth starts to emerge from beneath all the headlines and the hero worship. Because what if that season was only ever possible because of a very specific set of circumstances that could never be repeated? What if the myth was built on something temporary? I want you to sit with that question, because we're going to come back to it. And the answer, when we get to it, is going to reframe everything you've seen from Bellingham since. Now, let's get properly tactical, because this is absolutely central to understanding everything that follows. The 2023-24 season did not happen by accident. Bellingham's numbers were not simply the product of individual brilliance operating in isolation. They were the product of one of the most deliberate and sophisticated pieces of tactical engineering in recent football history. Carlo Ancelotti, a man with more Champions League medals than most clubs have won in their history, looked at Jude Bellingham and made a decision that redefined his entire system. He placed Bellingham at the tip of a midfield diamond, effectively operating as a false nine, effectively operating as a shadow striker. In that position, Bellingham had the license to arrive into the final third from deep, to ghost beyond the last line of defense, and to finish. And the key word there, the word that everything hinges on, is space. In that system, the spaces were designed for Bellingham. The runs were designed for Bellingham. The movement of every other player on the pitch was calibrated, at least in part, to create the conditions under which Bellingham could be the decisive figure. Toni Kroos, who came out of international retirement that season, was orchestrating from deep, his metronomic passing freeing Bellingham to do what he does best. The wide players were pinning back defensive lines. The system breathed through Bellingham. He was not operating in a shared attacking environment. He was the attacking environment. And this is not a criticism of Ancelotti. This was actually genius. Ancelotti identified that Bellingham's capacity to arrive late into the box and finish was the most dangerous weapon in his squad. And he built everything around maximizing that weapon. The result was 23 goals, a Champions League, and arguably the greatest debut season any midfielder has ever had at the highest level of club football. But, and this is the but that changes everything, that architecture only worked because of who wasn't there. Think about this carefully. Bellingham was able to operate as a false nine because Real Madrid's natural center forward was Joselu. Joselu is a perfectly solid player, hardworking, positionally intelligent, doing exactly what was asked of him. But he was not a player who demanded the central spaces be built around him. He was not a player who commanded a particular tactical philosophy by his mere presence. He was a player who slotted into a system, Bellingham's system. Now here is the question I want you to think about, and leave your answer in the comments below. Do you think Bellingham's historic 2023-24 season was primarily down to his individual brilliance, or was it fundamentally dependent on the specific system Ancelotti constructed around him? Because the answer to that question determines everything that happens next. July 2024, the summer that changed everything. Kylian Mbappé signs for Real Madrid, a transfer years in the making. So anticipated, so talked about, so narratively inevitable that it felt less like a surprise and more like the completion of something always written. Commercially, this was an earthquake. In terms of global star power, Real Madrid suddenly had an attacking line essentially unprecedented in the history of club football. Mbappé, Vinicius Jr., Bellingham. But football is not played on paper, and tactically, this transfer created something nobody in the mainstream media wanted to talk about, an immediate structural problem. Because Kylian Mbappé does not occupy a flexible, adjustable role. Mbappé is a center forward, a central striker who operates in precisely the same spaces, the central attacking areas, the channel between the defensive line and the last third, that Bellingham had been ruthlessly exploiting for an entire season. And Vinicius Jr. had already cemented himself as the dominant presence on the left side. Rodrigo locked down the right. So think about the geometry here. The central areas, Mbappe's territory. The left side, Vinicius's territory. The right side, Rodrigo's territory. Where does Bellingham go? This is not a small question. This is the central tactical question of the entire post-2024 Real Madrid setup. And the answer that emerged was both logical and, for Bellingham, deeply limiting. He retreated. He moved deeper into the left half space. From a player operating at the tip of the attack, functioning as a de facto number 9, he became what he had been described as before Madrid, a box-to-box midfielder, a linking midfielder, an engine player. He was still playing. He was still contributing. He was still, by any objective measure, one of the most complete central midfielders in world football, but he was no longer the focal point. And the numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Goals per 90 minutes dropped from 0.74 to 0.28. Expected goals per 90 minutes halved from 0.74 to 0.34. La Liga goals from 19 down to 4. Now, the instinctive reaction everywhere, on pundit panels, fan forums, social media, was that Bellingham had fallen off. that he was in decline, that something had gone wrong, that the golden boy had lost his spark. But here is the twist. Here is the thing most people completely missed. Those numbers, 0.28 goals per 90, 4 league goals Chromoser, are actually fairly normal numbers for an elite central midfielder. The anomaly was never the second season. The anomaly was the first. Carlo Ancelotti recognized this. The surprise was never the lower output. The true anomaly was 2023-24, when Bellingham was afforded unprecedented freedom in a role that was never truly his. When those circumstances changed, the numbers returned to something more reflective of what a midfielder actually produces. The myth met reality, and nobody wanted to hear it. Before we move into the England story, we need to talk about something that rarely gets discussed with the seriousness it deserves: the physical toll. Because the story of Bellingham's decline in output is not purely tactical, it is not purely systemic. There's a third factor sitting underneath all the statistics, largely unacknowledged: Jude Bellingham's body. In the 2024-25 season, a thigh muscle injury disrupted his campaign. Then in July 2025, he required shoulder surgery, keeping him out for over 3 months. And then a hamstring issue emerged in February 2026. Let's think about what that means for a player of his style. Bellingham's game is built on explosive movement, late runs into the box, physical presence in contested areas. When he is fit and fully loaded, those qualities are among the most devastating in football. When he is carrying something, even a low-level physical issue, the entire game changes. And here is something nobody talks about enough in professional football: the psychological impact of repeated injury. When you have had a thigh problem, shoulder surgery, and a hamstring issue, all within roughly 18 months, there is an unavoidable subconscious recalibration. The explosive sprint you would normally commit to without thinking, now there's a tiny hesitation. The challenge you would throw yourself into, now there is a microsecond of self-preservation. These moments are invisible on a TV screen. They don't show up in statistics, but they are real and they matter. For a player whose entire value is built on explosive physicality, they compound the tactical challenges already closing in. So by the time we reach the England situation, by the time Thomas Tuchel sits down to make his squad selections, he is not just looking at a player who has shifted from false nine to left half space midfielder. He is looking at a player who has spent the better part of 18 months managing his body, navigating injury, trying to rediscover the physical peak that made him so frightening. Tuchel, to his credit, saw all of this. He saw the full picture. Not just the headlines, not just the highlights. The full picture. Now we arrive at England, and this is where it gets really complicated. Because the issue with Bellingham at England level is not just tactical, it's cultural, it's psychological. It's about what he represents to an entire nation. England has waited a very long time for a player who feels like a genuine, undeniable, globally recognized superstar. Not one of the best in the Premier League, not probably top 20 in the world, but genuinely, unambiguously, one of the best players on the planet, full stop. Bellingham, coming out of that 2023-24 season, felt like that player for England. And the weight of that expectation, the weight of being the answer to decades of hope and near misses and penalty shootout heartbreak, is immense. It is the kind of weight that distorts tactical thinking. It forces managers to make decisions based on sentiment rather than strategy. Because how do you tell the nation's golden boy that the system doesn't fit him? How do you tell the player who scored that goal in the Euros, that moment that sent England into raptures, that he might not be the best fit for the tactical approach you want to implement? You need courage to do that. Real, genuine managerial courage. And this is where Thomas Tuchel enters the story. Tuchel arrived as England manager with a very specific tactical vision. He is a coach of extraordinary intellectual rigor. He has managed at the highest level in Germany, France, England with Chelsea, and won the Champions League. He understands, perhaps better than almost anyone currently in management, what it takes to build a functional tactical system under pressure in a tournament environment with players used to being the stars of their respective clubs. And what Tuchel saw when he looked at the England squad was not a squad built around Jude Bellingham. It was a squad that needed Jude Bellingham to fit within it. These are two completely different things. At Real Madrid in 2023-24, the squad was built around Bellingham. The system was designed to maximize him. He was the axis around which everything rotated. At England, under Tuchel, the question became, where does Bellingham fit in a balanced, structured, tactically coherent system that also needs to accommodate other elite talents? And the honest answer, the answer Tuchel arrived at, however uncomfortable, was that a Bellingham carrying physical issues, whose confidence in his own explosiveness had been affected by repeated injuries, and who was no longer operating in a system that maximized his output, was not the non-negotiable selection that public sentiment demanded. The decision to drop him was not a statement about Bellingham's talent. It was a statement about system over mythology. It was a statement that said, right now, we need the best version of each player in their correct role. Do you think Tuchel was right to prioritize tactical fit over the mythology? Or do you think players of Bellingham's quality should always find a place in the starting 11, regardless of system? Let's break down the specific tactical challenges Bellingham presented to Tuchel's England, because this is where the analysis gets really granular and really interesting. Tuchel is a coach deeply committed to positional clarity. His best teams have always been built on players who understand their roles with precision, who know when to press, when to hold, when to transition. His systems are fluid and adaptable, but they require players who understand structure at a sophisticated level. Now think about where Bellingham had been operating for Real Madrid post-Mbappé. He was in the left half space, essentially asked to be a linking midfielder, connecting defense to attack, supporting transitions, carrying the ball through lines. These are things Bellingham can do. His technical quality is beyond question. But the version of Bellingham England fans had fallen in love with, the version that ghosted into the box and scored crucial goals, that version required a very specific tactical environment that Tuchel's England could not simply recreate. If you put Bellingham in a deeper midfield role, you lose the penetration that made him famous. If you push him forward into an advanced attacking position, you create an imbalance elsewhere. If you build the entire England system around his best qualities, as Ancelotti did, you potentially compromise the structural integrity of the team. This is the tactical puzzle Tuchel was staring at. And here's what makes it even more complex. England had other midfielders who fit the structural requirements of Tuchel's system more cleanly, not players with Bellingham's ceiling necessarily, but players who could operate within the system's demands without requiring it to fundamentally reorganize around them. For a tournament manager, a coach who needs his team to be functional against multiple different opponents across a compressed schedule, that kind of structural reliability is enormously valuable. Tuchel was not saying Bellingham is not good enough. He was saying the current version of Bellingham in the current system, with the current physical situation, creates more tactical problems than it solves. That is a completely coherent position. It is, in fact, exactly the kind of analysis that separates elite managers from good managers. Now here is something genuinely underappreciated in this whole conversation. It requires us to zoom out from Bellingham specifically and look at football history more broadly, because this is not the first time this has happened. Not even close. The story of an elite player being dropped by a national team manager after a period of underwhelming form, despite their transcendent talent, is one of football's most recurring narratives. And in many of those cases, history has vindicated the manager. Think about the broader pattern. Great players, operating within systems specifically designed to maximize them, produce numbers and performances that create a narrative of invincibility. Then something changes. A new signing, a tactical adjustment, an injury, and the numbers drop. The public sees the drop and panics. The manager sees the drop and analyses it. And the manager who has the courage to act on the analysis rather than the narrative is the manager who, in retrospect, made the right call. This is essentially what happened here. The public narrative said, Bellingham is a generational talent, therefore he must always start. Full stop. No debate. Tuchel's analysis said, Bellingham's form and physical condition at this specific moment, in this specific tactical context, means he is not the best option for the starting 11. These are not contradictory positions. They can both be true simultaneously. Bellingham can be a generational talent, and Tuchel can be right to drop him. These two things coexist perfectly comfortably, if you are willing to separate the myth from the tactical reality. The problem is that most football discourse operates entirely in myth. We build narratives. We invest emotionally in those narratives. And when those narratives are challenged, the reaction is emotional rather than analytical. Tuchel made an analytical decision. The reaction was emotional. And the emotional reaction, almost by definition, was incapable of engaging with whether the analytical decision was actually correct. Here is where I want to reframe the entire narrative one more time, because I think there is a version of this story that is actually, underneath all the controversy, genuinely optimistic for Jude Bellingham. Think about this. Bellingham is still, at the time of these events, a young man. His trajectory as a footballer is still being written. The ceiling, and this is important, has not changed. His intelligence, his technical quality, his tactical adaptability, his ability to operate in multiple roles at the highest level, none of those things have disappeared. What the last 18 months have done is create a kind of forced recalibration, both at Real Madrid, where Mbappe's arrival pushed him into a different role, and at England, where Tuchel's decision sent a clear message about what is and isn't working. Bellingham has been given information. Hard, uncomfortable, unwelcome information, delivered in the most public way possible. But information is not the enemy of development. Information is the foundation of it. The question now is, what does Bellingham do with that information? Does he resist it? Continuing to try to be the false nine from the 2023 to 24, chasing a season that was extraordinary precisely because it was unrepeatable? Or does he evolve? Does he look at the tactical landscape around him, assess where his qualities are most valuable, and develop a version of himself that is sustainable across different environments? Because here is the truth I genuinely believe, and I want to know if you agree. Leave it in the comments. Bellingham's best years are not behind him. They are not the 2023-24 season. His best years are the ones that come when he fully inhabits the role of a complete, evolved, tactically mature midfielder. The kind of midfielder who can read a game at the deepest level, who contributes across multiple phases, who makes the people around him better without necessarily being the one who scores the decisive goals every week. That player, the mature, evolved version of Jude Bellingham, is potentially one of the greatest midfielders in modern football history. Not the myth. Something better than the myth. Something real and sustainable and genuinely great. Tuchel, in dropping him, may have accelerated the path to that player. By removing the pressure to live up to an unrealistic standard, by essentially saying, we need you to be the best version of what you actually are, Tuchel may have given Bellingham the most valuable gift a manager can give a player. Clarity. We have covered a lot of ground. We looked at the tactical architecture of Bellingham's historic debut season at Real Madrid. We analyzed exactly what changed with the arrival of Mbappé and why the numbers dropped the way they did. We examined the physical setbacks that compounded the tactical challenges. We unpacked Tuchel's decision in the context of his managerial philosophy and England's structural needs. And we tried to place all of this within the broader historical pattern of how football processes the gap between myth and reality. So let's answer the question. Was Thomas Tuchel right about Jude Bellingham? Yes, I believe he was. Not because Bellingham is not talented, not because the 2023-24 season wasn't real, not because the late winners and the clutch moments and the trophies and the awards didn't happen. They absolutely happened and they were breathtaking. But because Tuchel looked at the full picture, the post-Mbappé tactical regression, the repeated physical setbacks, the way system changes affect a player's output, and made a decision grounded in analytical honesty rather than emotional narrative. He said, right now in this context, we need something different. And that is exactly what a manager of his quality is supposed to do. The most dangerous thing in football is not a player who is struggling. The most dangerous thing is a myth. A myth tells you that a player must always play regardless of form or context or system fit, because the narrative demands it. A myth makes it impossible to have an honest conversation about what a player is and isn't doing on a football pitch at a particular moment in time. Tuchel tore down the myth, and in doing so, he may have created the conditions for the real Jude Bellingham, the evolving, adapting, growing Bellingham, to eventually emerge. That, in the end, is what great management looks like. Before I let you go, a few things I want to leave you with. First, this story is not over. Jude Bellingham is still one of the most extraordinary footballers of his generation. The chapters ahead of him are unwritten, and at Cyberboot, we will be tracking every one of them with the same tactical depth and analytical honesty we brought to this video. Second, I have a question for you, and I genuinely want you to answer it in the comments. Do you think the best of Jude Bellingham is still ahead of him? And if so, what does that best version look like? What system? What role? What club context? Tell me. Argue your case. Go back and forth with each other in the comments. That is exactly what the Cyberboot comment section is for. Proper football discourse, not just reactions. Third, if you made it to the end of this video, you're exactly the kind of football brain this channel is built for. We go deep here. We go tactical. We go beyond the surface. If that is the kind of content you want more of, subscribing to Cyberboot is the single most important thing you can do right now. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, because the next video we have coming, trust me, you do not want to miss it.